It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Good.
You had to pause a little bit before answering that.
I feel smaller somehow.
All right. Well, looming large across the table, Anne-Sylvaine Chassani, Paris bureau chief for the Financial Times. How are you? And we're also pleased to welcome back Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine. We always love visitors on the show. Alvaro Sierra, director of France 24's Spanish language channel. I say visitor because you're based in Bogota.
In Bogota. We just began operations last September, and I'm visiting headquarters now.
Well, glad you could drop in.
Glad to be here.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag World This Week. Russia says it's ready to retaliate and also to cooperate. This week saw the UK announce the largest expulsion of Russian diplomats since the Cold War, 23, as it prepares further measures. And the Prime Minister visiting Salisbury, where earlier this month up to 500 people were exposed to a military-grade nerve agent, the one that's left former Russian double agent Sergei Skripal and his 33-year-old daughter in critical condition.
We do hold Russia culpable for this brazen act and despicable act that's taken place on the streets of what is such a remarkable city.
Such a remarkable city. Now, that was Theresa May on Thursday. It's now come to light, Christopher Dickey, that a murder investigation has been opened over the suspicious death on Monday night of another Kremlin opponent. We're talking about Nikolai Glushkov, a 68-year-old businessman close to Boris Berezovsky. And he showed signs, say investigators, of compression to the neck.
Strangled, yeah. Which does suggest murder in most places. But we don't know who, we don't know why. We know that would make 15 suspicious deaths that the British government is now going to be looking into.
Let's talk about the timing, because Monday night, Theresa May's already addressed the House of Commons. The pressure's already rising on Russia. What do you make of the timing of this latest death?
Well, I mean, I think you have to ask yourself how much pressure is really mounting on Russia. There's a lot of condemnation, but there aren't a lot of consequences attached to that condemnation. The sanctions that are being brought by the United States actually don't have anything to do with the poisoning. And they're very late and basically are just a reiteration of a lot of sanctions that existed before, except for a few individuals. So there's not much there. There was a joint statement between Germany and the United States, France, and the UK saying, we think it's Russia and it's a really bad thing. But there was nothing attached to that statement that says new sanctions or anything else. Removing a few diplomats is not really going to disturb Putin very much. So the question was, if this is really, as people are saying, a murder rampage by the Russians on British soil, that's pretty serious. You'd think that the reaction would be more serious than we've seen.
Anne-Sylvaine Chassani?
Well, I would also say that, you know, the issue there is that we don't really have any clear idea what the Kremlin is looking for in this whole, you know, affairs, if we assume that it is indeed true that they are behind of, you know, these assassinations and assassination attempts. Talking with, you know, diplomats here in Paris, many think that Putin was actually looking for some backlash, public backlash with the West, so close to the election on Sunday, just to create, you know, a sentiment of, you know, besieged
Us
Russia.
versus them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So, in a way, the problem of this, you know, the whole affair is that we don't really have any clear idea of it. It's a signal to the West to say, you know, we don't care about, you know, we're powerful, or is it a signal to the voters in Russia?
But it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, it could be both.
It can be all of the above.
Both.
Yes.
It's a signal. It's obviously a signal to exiles and to defectors. It's a signal of. It's actually also a signal of the impotence of the West, precisely that it can't react in any significant way. It definitely fits into the narrative that Putin pushes, that Russia is under siege. Putin pushes policies that create sanctions, like annexing Crimea, and then says, look, the world is turning against us for no reason. So this is the narrative he's been pushing, and he's going to be reelected by a huge margin on Sunday. And I think this is all going to help push the margin up, because on state-controlled TV, which is basically what people watch in Russia, the narrative is repeated all the time.
Yeah. Alvaro Sierra, if it is Russia, and we don't have the proof of it yet, the calling card was already given with the attack in Salisbury. Why a second case?
But it depends. I tend to agree with the fact that the election plays a good weight in the whole question. In the West, we tend to read Russia in ways that sometimes are a bit biased, because, the country is not big enough, huge, powerful enough for Putin to be in a dialogue with his people and his electors. And usually he's gotten away with what he did. Crimea, Abkhazia. Putin is used to defy the West, to see sanctions and warm measures, nothing really serious, and he gets away with that. So I do tend to believe that at this point, this week, with the election on Sunday, he's looking at that. Do you see? One element that we have to take into account is the only concern Putin has on behalf of the election is turnout. Yeah, it's the only one, because he knows he's going to win. So this may create this kind of national unity feeling among the Russian, and it might help him.
To drive turnout. When you saw Theresa May in the House of Commons Wednesday, did you sense that this was the right tone, this was the right message, these were the right actions?
No, I wouldn't, actually. For one thing, you have Theresa May now as the leader of Britain and not as the EU leader anymore, really, in effect. She doesn't come with the voice of 28 countries anymore. And she needed then to get the EU on board. So I think anybody looking at her standing up in Parliament would immediately say, this is a leader who's fairly isolated in the world right now. She's acting from a fairly weak, point of her leadership of the country. And what is she actually doing? Not very much. There's this whole argument that keeps getting rolled out every time we talk about acting against Russia, that we need Russia in some way to sort out Syria. But in fact, that never happens. So, the options, I think, by the West that they might take are options that they really don't want to take. They don't want to go to war against Russia. They don't want to boycott the World Cup in June. Things that might really hit at Putin.
And the British have it in their power to seize the assets of the billionaire oligarchs who are in Great Britain, but they're not going to do that either. And they don't even need international unity to do that.
Of course, there's a British oil company called BP, and it has a 20% stake in Rosneft. How far can they go?
That's true. They have, it's tricky when talking about Russia. Europe depends on Russia for gas supplies, for once. No, I think I slightly disagree on the fact that she's isolated. She actually managed to rally, France, Germany, the US, United States pretty quickly. And if I have to make one point, if Putin, wanted to test the unity of Europe, amid Brexit, if the idea was to test whether the existing alliances in terms of defense alliances were being loosened by Brexit or hurt by Brexit, I think he's proven wrong. I think Macron has sided pretty quickly with the British, and the French France knows who the friends are. And we heard strong words from Emmanuel Macron this Friday, denouncing Russian meddling. There's a lot of infighting, not so much within the Conservatives for once, but in the opposition benches. Jeremy Corbyn penning a piece in The Guardian this Friday, the Labour leader answering critics within his own party who found his statements in the House of Commons surprisingly clement towards Moscow. He stands by that caution in the op-ed piece, saying to Russia way ahead of the evidence being gathered by police in a fevered parliamentary atmosphere serves neither justice nor our national security. Flawed intelligence and dodgy dossiers led to the calamity of the Iraq invasion. But
Corbyn also backs the idea of a Magnitsky-style law to sanction oligarchs. We agree with the government's actions, he says, in relation to Russian diplomats, but measures to tackle the oligarchs and their loot would have a far greater impact on Russia's elite than limited tit-for-tat expulsions. We are willing to back further sanctions as and when the investigation into the Salisbury attack produces results. Do you agree with Jeremy Corbyn?
I agree with him that it would be a good idea to attack the assets of people who are close to Putin. Yes, absolutely.
If proven guilty.
Well, how do you prove that? I mean, none of them are going to have their fingerprints on it. None of them had a little vial of Novichok, nerve gas or nerve agent. So how are you going to prove that? You don't. In the world of intelligence, in the world of international policy, all this talk about having a smoking gun is the kind of thing that's always taken advantage of by terrorists, by states that conduct terrorist activities, because they say, how can you prove it? You can't prove it. And you get into the situation that we've talked about before. Putin's whole game is, you know I did it, I know you know I did it, and I know you can't do a damn thing about it.
Alvaro Sierra?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this in intelligence, this is called a clean job. I mean, it's impossible to trace the real authors. There is no smoking gun, and you know that this is going to be, when you plan some kind of operation like this, if it was Russia, of course, you know that when the whole thing goes public, you will be blamed, but there would not be real proofs to show that you are indeed, your hands are indeed on that, you see? And I think that Putin profits a lot from that. I mean, there was, of course, a reaction and a kind of solidarity from France, Germany, the US with Theresa May. But it's just words. Huh? They do not go very far away on that.
And as you were pointing out, what's Vladimir Putin doing while all this is going on? Campaigning. We can show you images from Thursday. He was in Moscow attending a youth forum. A reminder that this is the first election in Russia in which citizens born under his presidency can vote. Yes, he's been in power for 18 years. A few days earlier, a BBC reporter asked him about the spy poisoning accusations.
President Putin, BBC News. Is Russia behind the poisoning of Sergei Skripal?
We are busy with agriculture here to create good conditions for people's lives. And you talk to me about some tragedies. First, work out what actually happened there, and then we'll talk about it.
Vivian Walt?
Oh, so cynical. Don't bother me with these little things like murder thousands of miles away. Very cynical response, and exactly what Chris was saying. You know I did it, and you can't do anything about it. I think the West is very boxed in by this, and particularly the spectre that, of course, this might happen again, many times over. So I think it's, it's very hard to see what the West can really do that will really affect him.
Donald Trump saying Russia probably did it. He said so in the company of the visiting Irish Prime Minister. The U.S. President, speaking on the day, his own government said Russia certainly did it and slapped sanctions, as Christopher Dickey was saying, on Moscow over election campaign meddling and cyber hacking. Does this case force Donald Trump to recalibrate when it comes to Moscow?
Well, for one thing, he's saying Russia meddled in the elections, but not me. So perhaps as, things are getting closer to him, he's prepared to say that a little bit more. But no, there's obviously, I think there's a wide sort of acceptance that Trump is in Russia's debt in some way or another. We're not entirely sure of the details, but, that has been sort of widely reported and probably quite credibly.
Christopher Dickey?
Well, I think that, Trump is undergoing a sustained experience of humiliation at the hands of Vladimir Putin. If we imagine, as it's easy to imagine on the basis of what we've learned over the past few months, that Putin has something on Trump, then Trump is constrained. He can't act. And so you have a weird situation now where the U.S. is making public not just interference with the elections, but deep probes into the American power grid, into the whole American infrastructure, capable of shutting it down. And also is blaming Russia directly for the biggest sort of global cyber attack, the worm, what is it, I can never remember the name of it, but this thing that they say cost $10 billion to the global economy. And they point all this out, and Trump says, well, on that poisoning thing, yeah, maybe they sort of did that. And Nikki Haley says at the United Nations, it's a defining moment, but it's not a defining moment for Trump. So you have all these people in the administration who are saying this is a big damn deal, and Trump is going, well, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's Cold War intrigue, but it's not the Cold War.
Yeah, it's very troubling, but I sense somehow that Trump has to agree with the thesis that Russia is, but you can sense that he's reluctantly getting there in a way. And his administration now with, the sacking of Rex Tillerson is probably not going to change that. He's, the new guy, Pompeo, is also pretty hawkish on Russia.
A former French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, giving a conference a few weeks ago, said, the leaders here in Western countries, they don't stick around long enough. Here we have what's the view on Vladimir Putin in Latin America, though?
Oh, it's a bit different than at least in Western Europe. I mean, Latin America, the last polls for the last, I would say, 5-6 years show that there is a kind of disappointing with democracy among large parts of the population. So they do not tend to see Putin as, they do not tend to have as a negative view of Putin and the way Russia is run and governed as we have in France or in the US, in sectors of the US or in the UK and Western Europe. Among Latin American leaders, among a good deal of Latin American leaders, there's a kind of longing for something like the thing that Sarkozy said. If we could govern and stay in power longer, it would be much better for me and for society and so on. Do you see? Sure. So there tends to be some kind of, I would not go as far as to say complicity, but some closeness to the idea that governments like Putin's one are not that bad.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about the very short shelf life, it seems, for cabinet members in Donald Trump's administration. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. Welcome back as well to Anne-Sylvaine Chessany, Paris bureau chief for the Financial Times, Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine, and Alvaro Sierra, who cracks the whip at France 24's Spanish language channel in Bogota. One of the parting shots of the United States Secretary of State before being fired this week will have been to blame Russia for the poisoning of Sergei Skripal. Rex Tillerson, fired over Twitter, by the way, replaced by CIA Director Mike Pompeo, also fired Tillerson's deputy, who stated that there was no reason given to the interested party. But of course, Donald Trump being Donald Trump, the president didn't beat around the bush.
Political guy that turned out to be a superstar, right? Rex and I have been talking about this for a long time. We got along actually quite well, but we disagreed on things. When you look at the Iran deal, I think it's terrible. I guess it was okay. I wanted to either break it or do something, and he felt a little bit differently. So we were not really thinking the same. With Mike Pompeo, we have a very similar thought process. I think it's going to go very well.
It's going to go very well, Vivian Walt.
Well, I love this. We've been talking about this for a while. I mean, Rex Tillerson might best be remembered for having called the president a moron, or rather bleep moron. And, clearly they never got along. That said, I don't think we should have much nostalgia for Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. There was widespread kind of upheaval in the State Department. There were mass resignations. He got rid of a lot of veteran career diplomats. And, he clearly didn't have much love for the whole,
So if you're a
profession of
career service
international-
diplomat, pick your druthers. Would you rather have a Secretary of State who doesn't have the ear of the president, or a Secretary of State who's in step with him, but that being in step with him is the likes of Mike Pompeo?
I think we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I think clearly Pompeo is somewhat to the right of Rex Tillerson, and I think we'll have to wait and see, what that means for diplomats working in the State Department.
The Economist, Christopher Dickey, in its editorial this week, writing, "The world is about to witness Trump unbound. What could go wrong?"
Well, I think Trump, in the clip you just played, did a very good job of explaining what can go wrong. I mean, the Iran deal is not something you just break. It's not a bilateral deal. It's a deal that froze Iran's nuclear program when they were well within a year of having the ability to make nuclear weapons. But Trump, when he speaks like that, he's speaking for 2 or 3 different reasons. First of all, because he is a moron. Secondly, because he's speaking to a constituency of morons. And thirdly...
Come on, you can't say that they're a constituency of morons.
Well, if they believe that the Iran deal should be broken, that is a stupid idea. That is a genuinely stupid idea. And that's who he's speaking to. He's speaking to people that he promised that he's going to make a better deal than anybody can possibly make on any issue, and including this one. This is really a very, very foolish move. And that's what Trump Unbound is going to be about.
And Sylvain Chassani?
Well, I think, this new appointment shows that there is no one really around President Trump to counterbalance his ideas, his views, and we know his views are pretty clear-cut and pretty radical. And when it comes to geopolitics and the Iranian deal, it's creating a lot of worry and concern, especially in Europe, that something might go wrong. The same with North Korea. I mean, Rex Tillerson wasn't on board. He wasn't consulted on the initiative to meet with Kim Jong-un. So it's extremely unsettling for the West. That said, there are discussions with the European Union on the Iranian deal. That there are attempts to satisfy
the leaders
some of the
of Britain,
demands.
France, and Germany this Friday saying that they're ready for more sanctions on Iran over its ballistic missile program.
Yeah, exactly. So there's
But
clearly,
that doesn't break the deal.
Doesn't break the deal, but it kind of addresses one of the demands of Trump on the ballistic program of Iran and also Iran's regional influence in the Middle East. So there's still some Tillerson was had become on board with this idea that we probably shouldn't touch the deal, but try to get Iran to do something more on its ballistic missile program. But we have to wait and see, really.
Alvaro Sierra, it's not just Rex Tillerson out. He's also being replaced with Mike Pompeo taking over. You have the number 2 at the CIA. Going up a notch, and she was sidelined within the agency over a black ops torture center, effectively, in Thailand.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I would say first, just to connect with what has been said before, I do believe that Trump is unbound since the very beginning, and that's one of the reasons why he has been losing so many people that he puts as his assistants, secretaries.
26 turnover of 26 cabinet members in 14 months.
Exactly. No presidency in the U.S. had shed such an amount of people in such a shorter period. Sorry. With what has to do with the question, first, I do believe that we have to see if she will survive the nomination. The new head of the CIA. I mean, these rendition places are really a serious issue that has to do with torture, which is an international crime. And I think that the way Trump has been changing his people is because he's trying to insist since the very beginning on doing his way, on even more on tweeting his way. And very often the system of checks and balances of American democracy shows him that he cannot go so far. So, for example, nominating Mr. Pompeo to be Secretary of State, which I'm not an expert in American politics, but I think is almost an unprecedented measure to have a CIA head as Secretary of State. There may be one or a couple of presidents, but not that many, do you see? So that may lead Trump to go further and further into those policies, but I mean, he has limits, and he has faced those limits several times before.
Well, Pompeo was a congressman before he was, so it's not that unusual. He's a politician before he's the CIA, the head of the CIA.
Will Gina Haspel's nomination sail through the Senate?
No, I don't think it'll sail through. I think a lot of people want to raise the issue of torture and what was done. It's interesting. A lot of people that I follow who are former people from the Central Intelligence Agency actually are fairly favorably disposed toward her because she's a professional, unlike Pompeo. And they see that as a good thing, and they're arguing, it's a sad phrase to use, but that she was following orders at a time of enormous crisis for the country when basically the CIA was desperate for intelligence. Everybody was desperate for intelligence, and they're making those excuses for her. Whether Congress will make those excuses for her, I'm not so sure.
It's still to be seen.
On the day that Syria marked 7 years of civil war Thursday, it also happened to be the start of a mass exodus of civilians from eastern Ghouta, the last rebel enclave near Damascus. ISIS is gone, rebels are on the back foot, but there's no end in sight to the fighting in Syria. In neighboring Iraq, it's the 15th anniversary of the U.S.-led invasion, the chance for you, Vivian Walt, to go to Baghdad and interview the incumbent Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi ahead of a May general election. It's interesting. In that interview, he's wary of seeing Syria carved up by the Kurds, warning that if you change the borders, there will be bloodshed in the region.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, what he sees is that what plays out in Iraq, as it has done for the last 15 years, has potential major disruptive effects for the rest of the region. And he's not the only one that believes that. So does, the Saudi leaders and the Iranian president too. So there is really a kind of a real anxiety about not only what might happen with the Kurds, but also within the kind of fracturing of Iraq, the possibility of ISIS re-emerging, and there are already signs of that actually right in the Kurdish region.
And more hardliners on the Shia side as well, and that the next elections could be kind to hardliners.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think the fact is that, this has been a really brutal war. It got somewhat sidelined by the Syrian war, but what happened, and not just in Mosul, but what happened in Iraq over the last 3 years has been an absolutely defining moment for the country. And the Shia militia are really awaiting what they believe is their just reward in this war. Without them, the country would really have been in terrible, terrible trouble.
Making war is easy, making peace is hard. Ask anyone who voted last Sunday in Colombia's general election, the first since the peace deal to end a half-century of fighting with FARC guerrillas. It's the prelude to May's presidential poll. Alvaro Sierra, when you look at the results, again, of this, I guess you could say the dry run, because there was also primaries on that day.
Yeah, kind of.
For the presidential candidates. Would you say Colombia is going to consolidate the peace, or is that peace teetering?
It's difficult to have a hard, clear-cut answer. I mean, back in 2016, at the end of 2016, when the peace deal was signed, we would be saying, many people in Colombia would be saying, that was the easiest part, the 4 years of negotiation and clinching the deal. Now comes the real hard part, do you see? And what we've been witnessing since is exactly that. And the election is kind of an example of that. You have the center-right or right parties making a slight win. I would not say it was a big win.
Yeah, because how much of it is bluster, posturing before an election, and how much of it is Colombians who really want to reject the peace deal?
No, I think take the votes that the FARC got. They got 52,000 votes for Senate and 32,000 votes over 14 million, almost 15 million votes. So they got nothing. So there is obviously a very strong sentiment in huge amounts of the Colombian population and electorate against the FARC. That's one thing. Second, on the right side of the political spectrum, people like former President Álvaro Uribe and his party, the Centro Democrático, are profiting from this feeling among the population, and they made, they made quite well in the parliamentary election. And then you have other party on the right that also did well. So we could conceive, and now we do not know, that's why I say that it's difficult to give a clear-cut answer, we could conceive that some of those two center-right candidates winning the presidential election in May, and it's not clear that we'll be able to have a majority in parliament. Yeah, and the same is valid for the two candidates on the center-left. So making a clear-cut long-term or mid-term projection of what is going to happen with the peace process is difficult. The only thing that is true, it will go through hard times to be fully implemented.
All right, something we'll continue to follow. Another sign that it's a changing world came with the announcement this week that retail giant Toys R Us was filing for bankruptcy, shutting down all of its 735 stores in the U.S., all of its UK operations. Will follow probably Australia, France, Poland, Portugal, Spain. And as shopping moves online comes the bigger question: how will humanity adapt to automation and artificial intelligence? One of those who wondered aloud about it was the great astrophysicist Stephen Hawking. He not only wondered where we're going, but where we've come from, studying the building blocks of the galaxy and the infinitely large. Stephen Hawking was 76 at Cambridge University, where he held the same chair as Isaac Newton. Students signing the condolence book, paying tribute to a brilliant mind who'd been told in his 20s he had 2 years to live when diagnosed with a rare motor neuron disease. His book, A Brief History of Time, proved a worldwide bestseller as he popularized physics and fought to save the planet.
So I want to proclaim the message loud and wide. We need to look after the planet. If we don't, the human race won't survive the next 1,000 years.
Stephen Hawking speaking with that voice activated, that voice synthesizer, someone with a sense of humor, but a very strong message there. Ansi Venchaseni, what's your take on Stephen Hawking and what we can learn from?
Oh my goodness. I'm really not an expert in black holes, I have to say, but obviously his life is is remarkable in its in itself, and the fact that he overcome this pretty horrific condition, and while being this amazing scientist. So in a way, his life is just very inspirational, and I don't know, it inspires generation of youngsters. I mean, my son is a fan. My son looks at black holes and asks questions about the universe all the time. So he popularized this idea of the infinite universe, in a way, and how we are just a little pieces of it.
Yeah, and the idea of popularizing it, and the French word is vulgarizing it. That always draws scorn from some academics because you write a best-selling book to explain it all.
Well, the fact that, I have to say, my son doesn't ask about black holes. I wish he did, but...
Uh-oh.
But, the fact that he could take the most cryptic, rather ethereal concepts, and even if we don't understand them at all, at least make them sound kind of cool. And be this kind of rock star of science is just remarkable. That's even leaving aside the fact that he was so extremely disabled. He really is a totally unique character.
Alvaro Sierra, one of his last endeavors was working on artificial intelligence, and he was worried that, we're kind of like Dr. Frankenstein in the lab. We don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, I know, and many of us are worried about the implications, as we are worried with any big new invention or any new big thing that humankind discovers. For me, Hawkins is. It's kind of a paradox. Look, we began the program speaking about people like Putin and like Trump and like Mike Pompeo and like the FARC, and we end speaking about a person that, you know, it gives you hope that this world has anyway the resources and the strength to find at the end of the day a good way to develop and to progress. Do you see? We do not have only the bad guys of this world, but we have also the Stephen Hawkings of the world. And the fact that he was working on artificial intelligence, it's for me a sign that, as with many other new things, inventions, there may be very important things that humankind can take profit from it. Do you see? And for me, the essence of these kind of figures is that they give us hope that we can build a better world and a less conflictive world at some point.
Do you share that hope, Christopher Dickey?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think as long as there are people like him around, where there's going to be some hope. We need more Hawkings and fewer Trumps, I would say. But I think one of the things that's fascinating about Hawkins is that, you know, none of us really understand the astrophysical part of his teaching. Except in the way that he explained it. His greatest power was his power of language, ironically, given that he couldn't actually physically speak. But his ability to convey ideas, to simplify and convey ideas, was hugely important, but to do it also in an intellectually responsible way. Not to keep coming back to Trump, but what Trump does is to simplify ideas in a way that is oversimplified, to say the least. That's not what Hawkins was doing. He was taking very complex concepts, and with the power of language, he was making them comprehensible, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, because like and Sylvain, I'm not a specialist on black holes, but this week I've been reading about bald black holes and hairy black holes to understand his concept of...
Oh, don't get personal, okay?
No, but it does help to explain it. We're going to leave it there, unfortunately. I want to thank you, Christopher Dickey.
Or luckily.
I want to thank Vivian Walt, as well as Alvaro Sierra and Sylvain Chessady. Stay with us, please. Media Watch is next.